Welcome back to the Liberating Generations podcast. I'm Dr. Keesha Ewers, and this is my daughter, Regan Clair. In this episode, we're going to explore the relationship between generational and personal trauma and the adverse childhood event study and adult health and behavior patterns like addiction.
Nice.
Yeah, this is a big one.
This is a big one. You're kind of a pro in this topic, so I'm excited to dive in and
I,
ask you some questions.
all right, shoot.
I'll be interviewing you.
Let's hear it.
So, what is the ACEs study exactly? Can you explain that?
Yeah. The Adverse Childhood Experiences Study was done between 1995 and 1997 by Kaiser Permanente and the Centers for Disease Control. And what happened was Kaiser had this really great weight loss clinic program that was working. And the director of the clinic started noticing that a lot of people were dropping out in spite of losing their weight, but they were dropping out before getting to the goal.
Mm.
Luckily, this investigator was very curious and said, okay, let's interview these people and find out what's going on. And what they found was that a lot of the people that had dropped out had a history of sexual abuse.
Mm.
And so that got the questions going. They combined with the Centers for Disease Control and looked at 17,000 Kaiser Permanente enrollees, asked them these questions that belong to the original Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, which I wrote about in my book, Solving the Autoimmune Puzzle, and the Cook and Easy Autoimmune Paleo Cookbook, because there's a big link between adverse childhood events like trauma and autoimmune disease and cancer in adulthood. There's also a big link between addiction, addictive behaviors, and adverse childhood experiences. So we're going to study this from a personal space because we're talking about intergenerational trauma and the liberation from it, which means we have to kind of know, right?
Right.
So we thought it might be interesting for you, our listenership, to hear the questions that are in the ACEs study. They're also in my book. However, what we wanted to do is to read through them and see if anyone resonated so that you can know your ACEs score. Now, here's the thing that I wrote about in my book. I said, so here's your score, and now what?
Right.
So as we read through these, it's with the instruction, the invitation, please, to stay open and try and know that just because the study outcomes, which we're going to talk about, are linked to lots of these events, that doesn't mean that that has to be your reality.
Right.
That's the cool thing.
Right.
So from a personal perspective, I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis in my early 30s.
Right.
58 now. It's never come back.
Mm-hmm.
And I have an ACEs score of 5 to 6.
Mm-hmm.
6. And that doesn't need to, when it was unexamined, I was heading in the direction that the study findings indicate and point to. When it became examined, which is what we're doing here, right? We're liberating from intergenerational trauma.
Right.
Then my genetic expression went a different way. So my autoimmunity went away. This is what can happen. This is power of healing intergenerational trauma. So as we read through these questions, it's very important that as your score, if you're somebody that has a high score, that does not mean that whatever findings were in the study are set in stone for you. And I'm living proof that it does not need to be that way. That actually knowledge is power, right?
Absolutely.
That's what we're doing here.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So do you want to read these for people? So if you're driving, don't try and multitask, please. But if you're in a place where you can grab a pen or use your phone, that's what you would do. I would grab a pen. You would use your phone.
Yes. Handy dandy notes app.
Exactly. Or message yourself.
Yep.
Yeah. Just do a little check mark for each one of these that you see yes to. Now, here's the other caveat is the ACEs quiz that was designed by this team of investigators way back in the 90s is by no means exhaustive. And so we'll
Mhm.
talk about that too, because that's really important to remember that because this is a limited study. Okay. These are just the
Mhm.
things they asked at that time as they were starting to explore. This was kind of brand new.
Mm.
The link between trauma and adult disease had not been made in science until this time.
Wow.
Yeah. And we're
Big.
still unpacking the findings from this big study.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there are 24 questions here. And as my mom said, if you are driving, what you can do is if you're answering yes, just you can keep track on your hand, on your hands. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Anyway. So
Just
it could
don't let it take away from your attention on your driving.
right. Not.
Wait.
Listen to her. Yeah. Okay. So do you want to get us started on one?
Go ahead.
Okay. Did a parent or other adult often swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you?
So this is if you when you were 18 years
Or older?
and younger. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. But it's for the events that happened when you were younger than 18.
Mm. Yeah.
So did a parent or adult? And so you're going to answer from your child self, right? This is adverse childhood experiences.
Right.
Adult trauma also matters. We'll talk about this afterwards, but this is just the ACEs quiz.
Right. So, in the mindset of 18 or younger, did a parent or other adult often swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you? And then you just answer yes or no. 2, did a parent or other adult often act in a way that made you afraid that you might be physically hurt? Did a parent or other adult often push, grab, slap, or throw something at you? Did a parent or other adult often hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured? Did an adult or person at least 5 years older than you ever touch you inappropriately or fondle you? Did an adult or a person at least 5 years older than you ask you to touch their body in an inappropriate way? Did an adult or a person at least 5 years older than you attempt to have or actually have oral, anal, or vaginal sex with you? Did you live or spend a lot of time with anyone who was a problem drinker or alcoholic? Did you live with or spend a lot of time with anyone who used illicit drugs recreationally or habitually? Did you regularly experience a lack of access to food, clothing, shelter, or medical care when it was needed? Did you regularly experience a lack of affection, companionship, or support from your parents, household members, or primary caregivers? Were you regularly left unsupervised or minimally supervised for long periods of time? Did your parents or primary caregivers regularly express a lack of interest or concern about you, about your whereabouts or friendships? Did you regularly experience a lack of interaction, play, bedtime, reading, help with homework, etc., with your parents or primary caregivers? Did a parent, household member, or primary caregiver have depression or another mood disorder or any type of mental illness? Did a parent, household member, close family member, or primary caregiver attempt suicide? Did your parents or other family members often shout, fight, or exchange physical blows with one another? Were your parents ever separated or divorced? Was your mother or stepmother sometimes or often pushed, grabbed, slapped? Did she sometimes or often have objects thrown at her? Was your mother or stepmother sometimes or often kicked, bitten, hit with a fist, or hit with something hard? Was your mother or stepmother ever hit repeatedly for several minutes? Was your mother or stepmother ever threatened with or hurt by a knife or a gun? Did a parent or household member regularly engage in illegal activities or behaviors? And did a parent or household member ever go to prison?
So you add up your yeses, and that's your ACEs score.
Mm.
So I have an ACEs score of 6.
And I had one of 3.
So the significance of this, as I mentioned before we started discussion of it, is that the findings in this study are that the higher your ACE score,
Mhm.
the more likely you are to develop every chronic illness that we have in our society today.
Mhm.
Autoimmunity, cancer, genetic expression of whatever your genes have potential challenges in. And also behavioral issues like not following through on schooling or, being more prone to sexual promiscuity, calling in sick to work a lot, obesity, um, addiction. The one that I found the most compelling when I was going through the findings of this study when I first started connecting the dots
Mhm.
was the higher your ACEs score, the less likely you are to engage in consistent self-care.
Mm.
So consistently stay on a nutritional program that nourishes and feeds you and doesn't move into like an eating disorder
Mm.
or just eating, bad food for you.
Mhm.
Um, consistently staying on an exercise regimen that's not punishing, but is actually in line with like your adrenal glands,
Mhm.
your hormone balance, right? What it is that your body's asking for and
Mhm.
can manage instead of the tyrannical mind that says, you should be this weight and I'm going to do whatever it takes to get you there, and kicking your body into shape in kind of an abusive way because it's more of a tyrannical lack of collaboration with the body, but more of a combative type of way.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm.
So I thought that was really interesting because that is definitely how I used to be. I was an exercise anorexic when you were a baby.
Mhm.
And every time, I had 4 children, and every time I would really work so hard to get my body back. And it wasn't in a loving, gentle way.
Yeah.
It was in a, okay, we will fit in these jeans again.
Yeah.
And it wasn't collaborative. It was like, you will fit in these jeans again.
Mhm.
And so slim fast, is what
Right.
I would live on until I got down to my weight. I would exercise a lot. And then
Mhm.
I would maintain my weight. I was a complete sugar addict. And
Mhm.
so if I made brownies
Mhm.
for the family, then if I ate 5 brownies at night, then I would run
Right.
5 miles for every brownie kind of thing is the way I
Mhm.
thought about it. So it's not a collaborative relationship, right?
Mhm.
And so that's interesting because that's actually that's a finding of the ACEs study that isn't often talked about.
Yeah.
Yeah. That these emotional eating and exercising habits and shaming self and body dysmorphia come from childhood trauma, which is intergenerational in nature,
Yeah. So it goes even beyond these ACEs scores.
way beyond.
Yeah.
Yes.
The ACEs scores, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's a nice guideline to show the trauma that you've experienced within your lifetime, but then it's not even touching on the intergenerational piece.
Well, interesting because the ACEs study was found to be limited in that way. And
Mhm.
then there's a Philadelphia expanded ACEs study, for example. So
Mhm.
different investigative teams have taken it and expanded on it.
Mm.
And in the original ACEs and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention have published a number of very good articles about their finding. And they created a pyramid. And
Mm.
so, we have a food pyramid that we've changed over the years from eat lots of greens to
Yeah.
no, that's not a good idea. We've realized,
Right.
right? Um, to this ACEs pyramid, which now includes, and in fact, I wonder, let's do a screen share, do one page and make it big. And then I'm going to share my screen. So for those of you that are able to view this will be kind of helpful, I think. So
And you can view this on YouTube, right? Yeah.
yes. Yeah. So this is the ACEs pyramid that came out of violence prevention. And, like what I said, the higher the ACEs score, if you have an ACEs score of 6 or more, then the findings of that study said that you are probably going to live 20 years less than someone that doesn't have an ACEs score.
Mhm.
Now, once again, that doesn't need to be that way
Right.
because the findings of the original ACEs study showed that 2/3 of the 17,000 people that participated had an ACEs score of at least 1.
Mm.
Now, that in and of itself was great big news because this
Mhm.
wasn't being tracked.
Right.
Yeah, so this is the original, and then there's expansion on it. And so if you look at this pyramid, the bottom of the pyramid has generational embodiment, historical trauma,
Mm.
and
Mm.
that's what we're talking about is
Yeah.
liberating from that. And in order to do so, it's like the map that we always talk about when we're
Right.
going backpacking and hiking. We want to know where you are, where you're going, and what the terrain looks like. This is one of those really nice things that we can pull out of our backpack, unpack a little bit, and go, oh,
Mhm.
so this is a key. I use something called the freedom framework when I'm helping people reverse their autoimmune disease. And I talk about trauma as being the missing piece of the
Mm.
puzzle, that we're all very different. You're a
Yeah.
unique puzzle. There's no one that has the same genetics, right? But this is a very important part. This is the missing piece. I think in healing addiction,
Right.
this is the thing that gets overlooked
Mm.
the most.
The generational part.
Generational trauma.
Mhm.
Yeah, and early childhood trauma,
Yeah.
right? So race and social conditions without local context. This is another one that went into the Philadelphia expanded ACEs, where now we're starting to talk about this, where in the 90s that wasn't
Mm.
landed on as much. Complex trauma, your ACEs, this allostatic load and disrupted neurological development. What that means is your health.
Mm.
And so as you look up, you can see coping, adoption of health risky behaviors.
Mhm.
And so sugar was what I used to soothe
Right.
myself.
Right. Alcohol
Alcohol
was what I
is what you
used.
use to soothe your anxiety.
Mhm.
These are coping
Right.
mechanisms that are unhealthy, dysfunctional.
Right.
So then we have this burden of disease, distress, criminalization, stigmatization, and early death. So this is, I think, fundamentally so important
Mm.
in our culture to bring up, talk about, look at, and go, no,
Right.
here's where I am.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
here's where I started, and here's where I want to go. So this is what I need to heal. Right?
Mhm. It's
Yeah.
just another tool.
Just another tool. So it's not meant, we did a show on the Enneagram, in fact,
Mhm.
2 shows. And it's not meant, just like the Enneagram, we talked about it, for you to say, oh, okay, this is why I am the way I am.
Mhm. Right.
Right? I'm a 2, I'm a caregiver. You then need to adjust yourself to that.
Right. Yes.
No, it's meant to be, oh, here's where I'm starting. Here's where I
Yeah.
want to go. Here's how I can liberate myself
Mhm.
from the structure of that, right?
Mhm.
The rigidity of it. Same with this.
Yeah.
We're really looking at, in your early childhood, were you bullied?
Mm.
Were you a victim of community violence, of racism? Was your neighborhood unsafe? Were you living in foster care? Those 5 are the expanded ACEs
Mhm.
that go outside of the questions we just asked.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're bringing it up into what matters today. Yeah. And so this comes from the Philadelphia expanded ACEs, and there are so many, we say that the ACEs study is a beginning.
Mhm.
And this is from ages 18 and younger, but then there's also adult trauma,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And I have been married to somebody that I've sent to jail for domestic violence
Yeah.
twice.
Twice. Yeah.
Hi.
Yeah.
And the first
Mm.
time that happened, 1 year into our marriage, luckily you kids were gone. You were out of the state, so you never witnessed any of that. I sat on my bed in my bathrobe for an entire day saying, "What happened here? How did I get into this relationship?" I counsel people about this.
Mm.
I help people leave these kinds of relationships. What happened?
Yeah.
And it was the first time I started to gently, gently touch the edges of, oh, I grew up with some masculine abuse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
And I'd never acknowledged that before.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so does that make my father a bad man? No. No, he was unskillful in some things that I can answer yes to the original aces because of it. And, you know, he didn't he didn't know himself. He didn't understand. He was raised by a very angry man himself. So when I'm doing therapy with people, we can look at that from an adult space. Oh, this is why this happened.
Mhm.
And the child part of you, the inner child that maybe has attachment disorder.
Mm.
I have big time attachment
Yeah.
disorder. That's
Yeah.
that was another ace that wasn't mentioned in here. No bonding with mother at birth,
Yeah.
10
Mm.
days in a nursery by myself. And so, that's a big one. And then does that then create a story that needs to be a story with a energy signature of victimization?
Mhm.
No, right?
Right.
That's what liberation from this is, oh, that's where it started.
Right.
This is what the outcomes were. I attracted somebody to my life and
Mhm.
married him that had an anger issue, much like my father's,
Right.
who had a father that was also a very angry man.
Right.
There's the intergenerational signature.
Yeah.
And then being able to heal it, set good boundaries, right?
Mhm.
Of course, my husband that I sent to jail said it was the best thing anyone had ever done for him.
Right.
He said, I never had anyone hold my feet to the fire before. I
Mhm.
didn't even know that manifesting anger in that way, expressing it was harmful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because he
Mhm.
grew up with it,
Right. It
right?
was normalized for him.
It was normalized for him. So these are the things that are so important for us to identify, heal the trauma. Like when you and I work with clients, we're working in retreat settings with
Mhm.
people, feeding them nourishing food.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, Reagan cooks the most amazing, nourishing food for our, right?
Yeah.
Taste of Liberation. Go to her website, Taste of Liberation. She'll help you with learning how to consistently engage in self care
Something I had to learn.
with that nourishment.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's talk about what you had to learn.
Oh, absolutely. Um, gosh, it's been in, the last few months, the last 6 months since getting sober from alcohol and really coming to terms with my own addiction. And it's funny, the results from the ACEs score, the sexual promiscuity, addiction, not being able to have consistent self-care. Oh my God, check, check, check. And I think that they all go hand in hand though.
Mm. Oh,
The
for sure.
all go hand in hand.
That was the beauty of the ACEs study is it
Yeah.
showed that,
Yeah.
right? It brought it all together under one umbrella.
Right.
Yeah.
The addiction, what stems from that is an inability to have self-care. And then also an addiction, sexual promiscuity comes with
Mhm.
when you're not in your right state of mind and you're seeking something external,
Mhm.
seeking that connection.
Well, we talked about the Enneagram in another session,
Mhm.
another show,
Mhm.
and we're Ennea type twos, and you were in the shadow of that.
Right.
Yeah. Looking outside.
The shadow being, yes, looking outside for something to validate, to self-soothe,
Mhm.
mhm, not being capable of looking inward. And so now the work that I've been doing these last 6 months, it's been just this journey of really being in this practice of self-care. And the way that that's manifested has been, yes, nourishment, nourishing meals every day. And what came from that was being able to be open about my eating disorder as well.
Mhm.
So eating disorder was also one of those results from the ACEs score.
Yes.
And my gosh, I mean, it's just been the most transformative experience of really being conscious with my body and on a daily basis and you touched on body dysmorphia a little bit earlier, and I still, I still have to look at that on a daily basis as well, because with disordered eating, it's not something that just goes away. It's
Mm,
not something that just magically disappears. It's something, and same with addiction. I mean, these are things that are with us, if you are in similar shoes to my own, with us for the rest of our lives. And so it's being able to be vulnerable with that reality and be authentic with yourself and with those around you. And so, yeah, with Taste of Liberation, that's what was created from my journey to sobriety and my eating disorder being healed and, I mean, in recovery. Uh, and it's just a
6
space,
months.
6 months, and it's just a space for people who, I mean, to heal in community, because gosh, when we're keeping these things a secret from the world and we're just in our own shame, that's when we give the power over to the thing
Yes.
that we're so terrified of the world seeing. And so Taste of Liberation is just, it's a place to come to get that support. And yeah, you can get nourishing recipes. You can get one-on-one coaching with me. I mean, everyone's welcome, whether you're healing from addiction or disordered eating. It's just a space for community and support.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Well done. Well
Thank
done.
you.
So this is what you're touching on is post-traumatic growth.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that happens as a result of childhood trauma is often post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, flashbacks, the urge to numb out, the inability to sit and stay still with uncomfortable feelings
Mhm.
like anxiety and depression, fear.
Yeah.
So the ability to witness them, sit with them, allow them to process through and digest rather than numbing them out. And that takes, often therapy,
Mm.
and, we, I run groups using plant medicine and also groups not using plant medicine to really help get to the place where the left brain can move aside the judge, the protector, that's right there always, always, and bring up your heart-centered, compassionate, nurturing essence part of you that is also there, the
Yes.
luminous nature that is really you,
Yes.
and have contact with that remains consistent and stable. That's the work. That's the
Mm.
journey of liberation right there.
Mhm.
And oftentimes when people come into my practice, their adrenals are shot,
Mhm.
their hormones are imbalanced, they have a really unhealthy gut microbiome, um, inconsistent self-care habits,
Yeah.
and I call it the misery to motivation ratio in my book, Solving the Autoimmune Puzzle, because the more miserable someone is, the more motivated that
Mm.
they are to really engage in what needs to happen to move into post-traumatic growth instead of post-traumatic stress disorder running the show. If you find that you get triggered a lot and your child self is driving your car of your life, that's not a very safe way of living, right? Quite literally.
I wouldn't recommend it.
Says the one who drove her car into the side of a building. Yeah, it's when a child was driving.
Yeah.
Doesn't
It
work.
doesn't work.
Doesn't work.
No.
And so, with
But talk about misery to motivation.
now she's motivated.
I'm miserable enough to be motivated.
And it's really unfortunate, but that seems to be what humans require. It's
Yeah.
this very big misery to motivation.
Yeah.
And so what we do is say, okay, I call it the freedom framework, that you need to actually work as if you're a unique puzzle. There's not one formulaic way of healing from your ACEs. There's not one way that gets you there. And that's, a lot of my
Yeah.
patients that arrive into my practice are kind of angry
Right.
because they feel like Western medicine's let them down, that their psychotherapist has let them down. And it's not that. It's because that part of the puzzle that includes unhealed trauma has not been thoroughly, properly addressed.
Mm.
So the freedom framework is you are a puzzle. You have these four corner pieces of a puzzle that we need to lock in the edges, right? And the four corners are your genetics, your gut health, your level of toxicity, the toxic burden that, we have air, water, soil full of toxic chemicals now,
Yeah.
and then trauma. And they all interact with each other. So, for example, science tells us this. The higher your level of trauma, the higher your ACEs score, the more intergenerational trauma that you have,
Mm.
your genetics will express themselves towards disease. So genetics is one of the corner pieces of the puzzle.
Right.
We also know that it'll be harder for you to detox toxins because if you think about it, in early days of humanity, our brain is designed to remember where the poison berries are, where the saber-tooth tiger lives, right? If the fire is hot. So we remember our traumas for a very good reason. And women especially do. We have this really lovely corpus callosum in our brain that makes us really remember our traumas.
We hang on tight.
We hang on tight. And it's because we're the ones usually responsible for keeping the toddler out of the fire pit, remembering where the berries are so the toddler's not eating them, and right? Remembering where the tiger den is. And so we kind of have to remember. So it's like, when should we have a Velcro mind and when should we have a Teflon mind? And being able to know, like, what should we hold on to that will be a benefit? And then what is actually creating a victim cycle?
That exactly.
Yeah. Keeps us in PTSD, makes us highly sensitive, makes us so that we're intolerant to our environment and our relationships. So we get mast cell activation, histamine intolerance. The menu options of food starts to diminish as we age. We have more and more adrenal dysfunction. That means cortisol being poured out into our system that breaks down our gut wall. We get worse leaky gut, makes us more intolerant to the foods we're eating. And it's a cycle that just keeps going. And breaking it at that trauma level is really essential. You can't do it without that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's so much there that is really valuable about knowing your ACEs score, but then also being able to say, okay, there's where I am.
Yeah.
Here's where I want to go.
Right.
I can unload a bunch of this from my backpack. It doesn't need to be so heavy.
Yeah.
I can be very, very, very conscientious, bring everything out into my conscious mind, not have it operating in the subconscious and unconscious, be able to live my life with freedom and liberation rather than attached to all of that intergenerational. Right? Generations and generations back. Ideas about your safety on the planet.
Yeah.
Right?
It really does live in ourselves. It does.
It really does.
It's imprinted in us.
Yeah.
So if something can be living in ourselves in that way, of course, it's going to take a lot of deep work, more than talk therapy, to get rid of that trauma.
Talk therapy does not work. It does not work. You can go...
Unpopular opinion, talk therapy does not work. Sidebar.
And actually, studies show this. You can go with your friends out to have a cup of tea and do talk therapy. And what you're doing is you're speaking from, when you're talking to your therapist, you're speaking from your prefrontal cortex, from your adult brain. But this limbic system, right? And with PTSD, we have a growth in our amygdala, the part that's looking, are we safe? Are we okay? Are we respected? Are we lovable? All of those, like, are we okay? That part grows in volume as an adult too. If you consider yourself even overwhelmed all the time, you're growing your amygdala and shrinking your adult brain, your prefrontal cortex. So when you're sitting there doing talk therapy, you're doing it from your adult brain.
Right.
And we have to learn how to access this part, the
Right.
child part.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's the work that I do with people is we're accessing that, healing that one, right? Giving that one a voice.
Yeah.
The story is so important, not to tell over and over and over again,
Yes.
but to hear and reframe.
So I would love to put our email out or something for our listeners.
We'll put it in the show
We'll
notes.
put it in the show notes. Yeah, because the type of healing, the type of work that we do is absolutely it's in circle.
Mhm.
It's healing as a community, as I kind of stated before, but it's really diving in deep to those childhood traumas and you're holding space for all of these other people at the same time. So the beautiful part about it is you're holding space and hearing your own story and someone else's experience. And from that level, so much healing is able to take place. And it's just, I mean, this, 6 months of sobriety has been in part because of those circles.
Yeah. That's the group process
Hmm.
that we do here. And then I also do one-to-ones with people.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, sometimes people are shy to
Yeah.
start with about group.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would also invite the people who are shy that oftentimes is a fear of vulnerability.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And just to let them know that it is safe. It's
Mhm.
safe to be vulnerable.
She walked around the circle telling her story or riding her car and oh, that talk about how important that was
Mm,
as a resource. I could see it happening as you're going around
yeah.
telling the story, unsure if the people in the circle would be able to hold that.
Yeah. Talk about dark night of the soul, one of the worst moments of my life, this pinnacle of shame being the most liberating experience ever. Really being able to show my darkness to people, to a group of people whom I love, and them embracing me and loving me and accepting me
Yep.
because of my flaws, because of my mistakes.
Yeah.
Like that right there.
And knowing they have their own flaws,
Exactly.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
We're not so different from
We're
each
not.
other. We have different habits and behaviors, but
Yeah.
our motivations are all pretty similar. We all want to be happy
Yes.
and we will all try to stay out of suffering in any way possible.
We
It's
all
just
want to be loved.
yeah, we all want to be loved.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so sometimes we think that removing ourselves from a state of suffering means eating sugar, watching a lot of Netflix, drinking alcohol, right?
Mhm.
Until we discover that, oh, that's not a long term solution,
Right.
right? That the child part of us is actually asking to be heard,
Yeah.
to be seen, to be embraced and loved,
Yeah.
and to be taught something that they didn't get in that moment in their childhood. This is the other thing is there's no perfect parent. And we cannot be with our children 24/7 to help them navigate life's difficult waters. And so the whole design of being human, this is a really important moment right here.
Mhm.
The whole design of being human is that we are going to be traumatized in childhood. Everyone has trauma.
Mm.
So we talked about ACEs, and then I said, this is by no means conclusive. And in the DSM-5, book of pathologies of psychiatric illnesses, we're not going to see a lot of what is traumatizing to children,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
Like,
Most of that stuff happens on the playground, on the
yes,
school bus.
exactly.
Yeah.
Being called rat face on a school bus
Right.
by a bunch of really rude little boys.
Yeah.
That is not
That was
going
traumatizing.
yeah, definitely, and affected you forever,
Yeah.
and so this is so important that we understand that the aces that we read at the beginning of the show were a beginning point,
Mhm.
but a lot of the invisible ones that have not been named that are yours, I sometimes talk about a woman that came to see me with Hashimoto's thyroiditis, and she'd been to a lot of doctors. She'd worked with people in functional medicine, but she heard me talk on a summit. And when I started asking her about childhood trauma, she said, I didn't really have any. I had a really good childhood. And I said, wonderful. And let's delve a little bit deeper because everyone's had trauma.
Yeah.
And when we started getting into it, it turns out she was the youngest of 3 children, 3 girls. And she always got hand-me-downs at every holiday, never got new clothes. And so when she got into college and in her 20s, she had racked up not only an autoimmune disease called Hashimoto's, but she'd also racked up a huge amount of debt because every single time she had a hard day or a bad day or a moment where she wasn't comfortable, she would go shopping. She felt like I didn't get what I wanted when I was young as far as new things. I deserve them. And so she had a credit card balance that was so high and it was causing her so much stress, and she was trying to keep it hidden from her husband. And so there was all this secrecy and shame around money. So we had to heal that. And once we did, and she could speak about it without shame, and she got out of debt. I gave her a program for that, and her Hashimoto's reversed within 6 months. I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So these are the kinds of things like credit card debt is not in the DSM-5.
Right.
And then the root of that credit card debt was being the third of 3 sisters and getting hand-me-downs. That's not neglect.
Yeah.
Right? That's the family culture. And she created a meaning about that said, I'm not worthy, I'm deserving, I'm not good enough, I'm not as loved or lovable as my sisters. And then went to the races with that, would get triggered every single time, something like that. That's the button, right? It would get pushed and then she'd shop. So all of us have these in a whole variety of different flavors. So this is the thing that's really fun to explore, because then you get to, again, it normalizes it when you're in circle the way that, when we're in retreat, you get to hear someone's story like that and say, oh, I actually kind of do that too.
Right.
Okay, let me explore that. What's the hole that I'm trying to fill with that,
Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe I can shift from there my behavior once I heal the child part who's feeling somehow like there's a deficiency there.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. This is the value of the ACEs and beyond. Right? We don't stop with the ACEs, but the ACEs are a great place to start the conversation with yourself. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Bring it up into the conscious light and then go from there.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So we'll put the ACEs quiz in our show notes too.
Yeah. Thank you so much for going through that. What a wealth of knowledge you are.
Oh, thank
I
you.
love you.
Thank you. Me too. Well, inspiration over here. Yeah. Of healing from 3 ACEs at the age of 25.
Thank you. I mean, I couldn't do it without your role modeling. So,
No.
yeah.
Well, making up for some unskillful parenting. Which is a
Part of life.
There it is. There it is. We all have trauma, and then we all get an opportunity to have post-traumatic growth,
Right.
which is wisdom, and become more skillful.
Yep.
Yeah.
And let me just say God, what an honor to be able to go through life with a mom who takes accountability for maybe not being the most skillful parent at times and apologizing. There's so much healing that comes from that. And that's been an amazing lesson for me to be able to witness and experience. So
that is one thing that I tell young parents is be willing to say yourself.
Yeah.
Here's where I messed up.
And if you're a child, be willing to say, I'm sorry as well. Yeah. I think just being a human.
Yeah.
Take accountability.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love you.
I love you too.
All right, everyone. Until next time, be well.